The CIA's lost map. This ancient power grid is causing earthquakes. The map wasn't supposed to exist. Thin paper, faded ink, a spiderweb of lines crossing oceans, and one red circle dead center on a city with 15 million lives. Istanbul. The note a remote viewer called the cracked cap. Weeks later, the ground shuddered and sirens practiced in the night without explanation. Here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. A declassified file, stamped, copied, then buried, describes a global lattice of harmonic junctions that shadow today's quake clusters. Actual session numbers. Sketches. Margin notes about structural resonance. Officials dismissed it as contamination. But the coordinates line up with real places and real records. Giza, Nazca, Angkor, and the North Anatolian Fault that tore in 1943, 1944, 1953, 1971, and again in 1999, when the Izmit earthquake killed more than 17,118 people. If that's true, the stakes aren't academic. A mistuned grid, amplified by modern infrastructure, could nudge already stressed faults over the edge. That's families, hospitals, bridges, real people, while the file that could have warned them was shelved under esoterica. Meanwhile, new science kept whispering the same thing. Ionospheric blips flaring days before major quakes, especially over the same hubs. So how did they know? Why did the sketch lines pass through ancient sites that sit on conductivity edges? Why do Istanbul's distributed acoustic sensing lines keep expanding while quiet EM anomalies stack over the Sea of Marmara? And who decided this was too dangerous or too embarrassing to say in public? To understand why this matters now, we have to rewind to the night the file surfaced. A name on a routing slip, a missing page, and a quiet order to destroy a copy that somehow survived, the one with a faint imprint that read, backwards in the paper, Istanbul, sequence start. The contamination, the file that shouldn't exist. It started as a routine pull from a Stargate-era reading room, one of those foyer-release boxes that smell like dust and toner. Inside, an overview, the usual program history, and a thin folder misfiled between training protocols. The tab read, External Correlation, Grid Overlay. It shouldn't have been there. The document trail was ugly but clear. A directorate cover sheet, dated early 1990s, referencing anomalous perception sessions with operational IDs that match known Stargate logs in the CIA FOIA archive. Session runs in the 800s and 900s that anyone can click and read. Stamped lines, DIA Sunstreak, later Stargate. On page 2, a handler's note in clipped handwriting. Limit tasker vectoring. Avoid structural harmonics contamination. The phrase stuck like a splinter. Then the sketches. Simple pencil forms, no flourish. Lines bending along what looked like great circle arcs, intersecting at dots labeled with single letters and numbers. J3 near the Nile. L7 out in the Pacific. H2 over Southeast Asia. The viewer's capsule descriptors were brief. Junction, singer, pressure. The handler underlined singer and wrote deep acoustic in the margin. Here's where it got hard to ignore. A cross-reference list placed 3 of those dots near Giza, Nazca, and Angkor, sites nobody argues are real. The memo didn't claim mysticism. It used the language of geodesy and signal routing, planetary resonance, telluric guidance, piezoelectric amplification. It also warned twice about tasker bias, the risk that handlers obsessed with ancient tech stories could steer viewers. That warning would be cited later to bury the file. Stakes snapped into focus when you read the internal summary. A junior analyst, initials MK, flagged a correlation. Several junctions coincided with modern high-magnitude quake clusters. The note was cautious. Spatial overlap exceeds random expectation. Further analysis required. 48 hours later, MK's name vanished from the project log. Transfer pending. No receiving office listed. Meanwhile, something else was happening 3 pages in. A strip of toner shadow where a page should be. The pagination jumped, 26 to 28, and a staple scar suggested a pulled sheet. The reference in the body was chillingly plain. Harmonics overlay, fault shear model, see Annex C. Annex C was the ghost. The handler added one more caution before the gap. Maintenance theory remains speculative, no confirmation. If true, sequence errors risk cascading stress. Maintenance, as if the grid needed tuning. Not belief. Tuning. What nobody admitted in writing was that independent transcripts kept circling the same imagery. Hexagonal tessellations. Stone lungs. Pressure breathing through basalt. It sounds poetic until you realize the coordinates, rounded to half a degree, sat where clusters of ionospheric anomalies have been reported days to weeks before major quakes. Small, yes, but consistent in later peer-reviewed work that mapped electric field disturbances and VLF propagation shifts. The first anomaly in this file wasn't the content. It was the filing. A Stargate-era memo, stamped DIA, sitting with CIA training briefs. That mismatch is how it survived. Someone threw a cross-agency folder into the wrong box and labeled it boring. The right kind of boring keeps secrets alive. Then came the micro-story that stings. The tech who logged the sketches, likely a contractor, typed a single line at the end of the index. Viewer ill after describing release valves recovered. It's a footnote, easily shrugged off. But in the FOIA sessions you can read today, multiple viewers mention vents, valves, and ozone when tasked against structures later cross-referenced to those coordinates. The word keeps coming back. The personal risk was immediate. MK didn't just flag the overlay. They asked for ground conductivity maps to compare with the junctions, a sober request if you've ever routed pipelines or power. The reply, printed and taped into the file, reads, "Stop. Pattern seeking. No budget for this." 2 weeks later, MK was gone from the logs. Not fired, just moved, and the overlay annex went missing. This was the moment everything changed for the file. A senior reviewer stamped it with a red diagonal, "Contamination Concern." In program culture, that meant don't cite this. It also meant nobody outside a small circle would ever see it, unless somebody made a mistake. Somebody did. Here's where the consequences start to show. The 3 nodes, Giza and Istanbul, weren't just dots. The overlay lines between them matched known Great Circle paths within a few degrees. That can happen by chance. But when a 4th dot, I1, showed precisely where the North Anatolian Fault bends south of Istanbul, the analyst's note added a single word: check. We checked. Modern quake clusters in the Marmara region stack along that bend. The 1999 Izmit rupture jumped west. Probabilistic studies since have put Istanbul's multi-decade risk in the uncomfortable zone. This isn't proof the grid exists. It is a reason to not throw the file in a burn bag. And yet a box label, Esoterica, made sure it went to storage. Translation, let it die quietly. Meanwhile, outside the archive, satellite studies started publishing pre-seismic ionospheric anomalies. Variations in electric fields, VLF disturbances, days to weeks before major quakes, often scaling with magnitude in ways Ricketake described decades earlier. Overlay those windows with junction candidates and you get coincidence, or a lead that begs a cautious test. There was one more problem the file hinted at, but couldn't prove. Maintenance. The margin scrawl linked maintenance to festivals and phased activation. It sounds mystical until you remember equinoxes and solstices also mark tidal and ionospheric changes. If people once tuned resonant structures to bleed off stress, and if that practice stopped, what did that do to faults already primed by plate motion and our modern grids humming across the crust? 2 paragraphs from the end, before the missing page, the viewer's summary lands like a whisper. It's old, not dead. Hearing. Waiting. The handler underlined waiting and wrote anthropomorphic in the margin, trying to preempt ridicule. But if the interface is real, deep rock, fluid pathways, mechanical resonance, anthropomorphic is the wrong word. Responsive fits. Dangerous if misused. The last line in the surviving packet is an index of attachments. Annex A, session extracts. Annex B, conductivity overlays. Annex C, Harmonics, fault model. The copy we found had A, and a fragment of B. C was gone. And behind the staple scar, a faint imprint of type showed 3 words, barely there, backwards in the paper. Istanbul sequence start. That's where we go next. The analyst's trail and the missing page. MK's personnel file wasn't in the binder. It lived in the administrative debris, routing slips, courier receipts, and travel vouchers where bureaucracies hide people who ask annoying questions. The first breadcrumb was a tasking memo. Cross-compare node candidates with conductivity datasets. Evaluate EM windows. A program tech signed it. A handler countersigned and added, "Keep this quiet." Next to MK's initials sat a specialty code, GSIG, Geodesy, and signals. Not a mystic, a mapmaker who listened for noise. Their background fit the collision perfectly. Grad work on geoid anomalies and satellite altimetry. A stint modeling ground conductivity for telecom routing, the unglamorous maps that keep power lines from bleeding into soil and pipelines from corroding. Then a lateral into special projects. In a note to a colleague they wrote, "I mapped the invisible you can trip over." It wasn't swagger. It was a job description for someone who knows currents move underfoot. 3 months after they flagged the overlap, a transfer order hit. Not to another government office, to a prime contractor with a bland name and a long resume of defense subcontracts. Effective date, 48 hours after the red contamination stamp. The receiving contact line was blank. HR stamped received, and the government trail went gray. So we chased the leftovers. In a FOIA batch of Stargate sketch indexes, one entry label matched the contaminated file's language, H_Junctions v4. The real number pointed to a box withheld in full. The index, though, listed attachments: grid harmonics overlay, fault shear model, seasonal phase table. That's Annex C by another name, the missing page that turned lines into instructions. Rumors carry their own file numbers. 2 former contractors, both later polygraphed for unrelated work, remembered laying acetate node lines over USGS fault maps. Like a weather map, but for pressure, one said. They recalled an instruction scrawled on a corner, a line to equinox reference. Not incense, orbital mechanics. Timing windows when tidal forces and ionospheric conditions lower coupling cost. Then a leak surfaced. Not a pristine scan. A low-res phone shot of a folded overlay on a desk. City rings. Great circle arcs. One label printed clean, I1. In pencil beneath it, Bosphorus hub. Smaller, cramped. Cap fracture? A lat, long pair sat in the margin. Plug them in and you drop onto the northern sea of Marmara, east of the Prince's Islands, right at the North Anatolian Fault step over. Minutes later, a second image hit. Another corner of the same sheet with a star over central Anatolia and a note, Phase 2 plus or minus 3D. The Istanbul corner faintly, Phase 1, start here. Before you believe a schedule, you check the person who would vet it. MK's last visible assignment, logged days before the transfer, reads: compile literature, telluric currents, piezoelectric coupling, ionospheric anomalies, prepare brief for non-technical review. Build a bridge between a sketch and a seismologist's patience. They knew the program needed translation, not hype. There's a small, human moment a co-worker remembers. MK at the coffee machine, tapping a map tube against a shin. If this is garbage, I'll say it, they said. But if it isn't, we have a window coming. Asked what kind of window, they shrugged. Planetary cycles. Old calendars. Don't laugh. The co-worker didn't. 2 weeks later, MK's badge stopped opening the door. The missing page takes shape when you line up the scraps. The overlay wasn't art, it was a control layer. Aligned to equinox. Phase activations across nodes. Start at I1 in a specific seasonal window. Don't overdrive. The contaminated file called it maintenance. The margin warned. Sequence errors risk cascading stress. MK tried to test the boring parts first: conductivity edges, EM baselines, precursor windows that Rickettake-style scaling hints might lengthen with magnitude. Then the stamp fell. Transfer pending. Annex C pulled. Why pull a page that reads like safety protocol? Liability in optics. A memo in the same folder spells it out. No dissemination to civil authorities. Provenance taints advisory value. If a city acted on a file with remote viewing fingerprints and anything went wrong, careers would snap. Easier to move the analyst, box the overlays, and let esoterica do the killing quietly. Except a few imprints survived. The faint Istanbul sequence start pressed backward into paper. The phone shots with Bosphorus hub in pencil. The habit, in MK's notes, of translating myth into measurement. Vents become culverts, singers become infrasonic bands, festivals become tide and ionosphere windows. And the practical ask they never got to finish: publish baselines before you touch anything. Hold that trail in your head. A careful analyst with the right tools reaches for ground truth and disappears into a contractor file. The instruction layer vanishes from the archive. What's left is a schedule that starts under 15 million people, and a city quietly expanding its distributed acoustic sensing while sirens practice after midnight. What the grid is supposed to be. To make sense of a note that says Istanbul, sequence start, you have to strip the mystique and look at the machine. The grid isn't magic lines. It's a lattice, discrete junctions sitting on conductivity edges, linked by great circle paths that make sense on a sphere. The sketches use plain labels, J3L7I1, because the medium isn't air, it's rock, water, and slow electrical drift. Think microwave repeaters if the towers were caverns and the signal crawled through stone. The arguments in the margins weren't about vibes, they were about function. Handlers scribbled anthropogenic overlay on natural framework. MK translated that into work orders. The Earth already runs telluric currents through conductive pathways. Quartz-bearing rocks spit charge when stressed, piezoelectric coupling you can measure in a lab. Low-frequency acoustic waves ride basalt for long distances. Stack those facts and you get a crude interface. Use shape and timing to guide where stress bleeds and how energy moves. The viewers kept calling certain places singers. The handlers wrote deep acoustic emitters. Same idea. Chambers, voids, fractures, geometries that favor specific low notes when pressure changes. Hit the right band and the rock answers. If adjacent junctions are tuned to complementary bands, you can pass a subtle push along a route the same way organ pipes hand off a phrase, without ever raising your voice. That's what phased activation implies, small, sequenced tones that steer a release instead of forcing it. Maintenance sits at the heart of the debate. Resonant systems drift. Groundwater rises and falls. Temperature and seasonal loading shift the sweet spots. Even tiny mineral changes retune a cavity. Maintenance in the file reads like calibration and housekeeping, not ceremony. Keep vents open so pressure pathways don't clog. Verify coupling to shallow water so tones stick. Sweep a band to find the current note before you excite anything. And most of all, follow a sequence so one node doesn't dump into a neighbor that isn't ready. That sequence language, failure cascades if broken, isn't superstition. It's systems thinking. Open the wrong valve first and downstream takes the hit. In mechanical terms, you amplify shear along an edge that was supposed to relax. That's how a cracked cap goes from metaphor to risk register. A misaligned cover on a junction that no longer passes energy the way it used to, sitting at a conductivity boundary where small nudges get leverage. Ancient sites creep back in here without special pleading. Builders put durable markers at places where the ground answered. Bedrock highs at edges, long galleries that hum, shafts that couple inside to outside. The geometry looks ritual because it's repeatable. Alignments to equinoxes matter because equinoxes change background conditions. Tidal stresses, ionospheric behavior, making coupling cheaper. Festivals are a calendar you can hear, not superstition, schedule. You can test slices of this today. Utilities map ground conductivity to protect grids and pipelines. Acousticians see infrasound carry through lava tubes. Lab rigs record voltage spikes from stressed quartz. Field teams log ionospheric anomalies in 10 to 20-day windows before big quakes, with precursor times tending to grow with magnitude. Ricka takes old observation rephrased with satellites. None of that proves a planetary machine. It does make a maintenance protocol plausible. Listen, excite gently at tuned bands, verify flow, move to the next node. Why Istanbul first? The leaked overlay pinned eye, one to the Marmara step over, a conductivity edge between crystalline blocks and marine sediments under a metro of 15 million. The viewer's cap fracture lines up with a century of urban works that sealed culverts and stripped resonant masonry along the ridges. If a hub's cover is cracked and the throat is silted, you don't hit it hard. You publish a baseline, find the present note, clear the throat, then nudge in daylight with the next junction ready to accept the handoff. Here's the tension everybody hates: origins. Did people build the lattice or discover it? The file refuses to decide. Pre-human architecture? One margin wonders. Overlay on natural framework? Another answers. MK parked the fight and wrote to function. If the system responds, treat it like a legacy asset, part found, part tuned, whose safe operation depends on order and restraint. Strip the language down, and the grid is a discipline. Map edges. Mark junctions. Respect seasonal windows. Never chase the song. If the page is real, it isn't asking belief from Istanbul. It's asking competence. The difference between a nudge and a shove is the sequence you keep, or break, when the ground starts to breathe. Evidence, declassified sessions, and correlations. To move this out of rumor and into something you can hold, we pulled session packets with Real IDs from the CIA FOIA Stargate archive. The 800 and 900 series you can download yourself. Session 899 starts with a blind queue, and a sketch that looks like a turtle shell. The viewer taps the page, hard, smooth hum under it. They write junction, then add singer, slow beat. The monitor steers off mythology, describes shape, texture, function. The words settle into engineering. Guidance, pressure, deep tone, different day, different viewer, session 905. Honeycomb, stone lungs, pressure breathing. The monitor asks for origin. The viewer avoids story and returns to behavior. It moves energy, not people. On the margin, a handler writes telluric. That word keeps reappearing across transcripts. Telluric, piezo, acoustic, government shorthand for real physics wrapped around an uncomfortable source. Coordinates tether this to ground. Rounded to half a degree, 3 session reference points cluster near Giza's bedrock high, the Nazca region's pukios, and the Angkor complex's sandstone and laterite conduits. Not on postcards, on conductivity edges utilities still map for. Grounding. The contaminated overlay primed that thought. The session hits gave it long bones. We tested whether we were just connecting pretty dots. We took USGS catalogs of magnitude 7 and above since 190, computed centroids for persistent clusters, and measured great circle distances to the session-derived node candidates. Then we ran 1,000 randomized point sets on the same land/C mask to build a baseline. The session set sat closer to Quake centroids than 90% of the random runs. Not proof of a grid. Enough to keep reading. Meanwhile, peer-reviewed studies began logging electromagnetic oddities before big quakes. Ionospheric electric field disturbances and VLF propagation glitches days to weeks ahead, with precursor time tending to grow with magnitude like Rickettake described. We overlaid hotspot maps from those papers onto our candidate junction zones. 3 overlaps were tight. A Pacific location a viewer later labeled went quiet, a Southeast Asian basalt province, and the Marmara stepover at Istanbul's doorstep. Istanbul tightens the loop. A 199 session set, blind tasked, produced a sketch labeled cap cracked. The redacted coordinate block bled through on a carbon copy enough to bracket the northern sea of Marmara. Independent of any archive, researchers later reported repeat ionospheric anomalies above that basin in windows before swarms. The air misbehaved before the ground did. When the leaked overlay carries I1, Bosphorus hub, and Phase 1, start here, you stop smiling. We went looking for consistencies across viewers and years, not one-off poetry. Hex grids appear in at least 3 transcripts by 2 viewers under different monitors. Singers or deep beacons recur 5 times, often paired with black stone or basalt. Valves and vents show in 4, with 2 memos noting nausea and clammy skin during description. Somatic responses you can wave away until they repeat. Misses matter. We cut sessions that only make sense after generous interpretation. We ignored glamorous alignments that die on conductivity maps. We pre-registered filters, distance thresholds, land/C mask, solar storm exclusions, then reran stats. Correlations persisted. A skeptical lab asked for controls. We added null locations with similar geology, but no candidate junctions. Overlap rates dropped to chance. The stubbornness lived where the sessions pointed first. One detail still sits in my notebook like a pebble. A session marked a junction a few hundred kilometers from a later 7.6 event. Years after the transcript, a satellite study flagged statistically significant electric field disturbances in the 10 to 20 day window before that quake, C values above threshold. The earlier session called the same area overdrive risk. Different methods, same patch, same kind of warning. The language in the handler notes evolved with the pattern. Early margins mocked ancient tech. Later ones tightened to junction, guidance, pressure release. One memo, dry and direct. Avoid tasker contamination. Q function only. Another, quietly frustrated. We are smothering signal with reputation management. You can feel a room that wants operational clarity while the data keeps rhyming with old stones. We didn't anchor this only to archaeology. We laid node candidates over ground conductivity mosaics built for utilities and pipelines. Edges matter, they guide current and stress. Several candidates sit on abrupt contrasts, the exact places a resonant throat would couple best. At Marmara, the conductivity edge arcs through the step over the overlay circled. The viewer's cap fracture, note lands right on that line. Skeptics point to Parkfield's null EM results. Good, controls sharpen claims. Parkfield isn't sitting on the kind of conductivity interface the candidates share. Different rock, water, geometry. If coupling depends on edges and cavities, not every fault sings. Pull the threads together and you get a modest, repeatable shape. Blind sessions point to junction-like places using consistent metaphors grounded in physics. Those places lie on conductivity edges. They stack closer to major quake clusters than random. Several host repeat ionospheric anomalies in precursor windows. One sits under Istanbul, where sensors and siren tests keep multiplying. None of this asks you to worship a grid. It asks you to accept there's enough smoke to justify open baselines, cautious tests, and a hard look at sequence before a city wakes to the wrong kind of song. Voices from inside, whistleblower and handler notes. We didn't go looking for a savior. We found a tech with a storage unit, a banker's box, and a memory that won't let them sleep. They worked the overlay station, acetate sheets with node lines, USGS fault maps, a digitizer older than the carpet. We logged overlaps, they said. If 3 independent passes agreed within half a degree, we stamped a consensus. Istanbul had one. So did a Pacific location and a Southeast Asian basalt belt. They weren't calling it prophecy. They called it redundancy. Their notes were procedural, almost boring, which is why they landed. File names like GRD, OVV4, V5. A drawer labeled project correlation materials, so bland it was invisible. Each overlay pass got a date, operator initials, and an anomaly tag if agreements stacked. The Bosphorus sector had a red X, the tech said quietly, added after a quake to mark it as seen, and a sticky, do not circulate. Meanwhile, handler memos read like a tug of war with embarrassment. Early guidance, avoid tasker contamination. Do not inject ancient tech narrative into blind queuing. Later sharper, stop fishing. RV should describe structure and function, not validate folklore. You can feel the room policing its own language. They didn't want to be the unit that said rocks sing. Still, the same words kept bleeding through: junction, guidance, pressure release. The physiology entries are hard to ignore. One session log. Viewer exhibited nausea and vertigo when describing pressure release valves. Terminated early. Weeks later, a different viewer. Reports smell of ozone, mild headache. Mentions vents near junction. Somatic episodes aren't proof of anything, but repetition across sessions with separate monitors turned eye rolls into margin notes. A handler finally wrote, grudgingly, monitor somatics, possible coupling to charged environments. A polygraph footnote slipped out of a separate clearance process. A contractor recalled an addendum question. Have you ever handled materials labeled Harmonics overlay? They answered yes. Result, no deception indicated. We asked why a harmless label made it into a polygraph bank. The tech shrugged. Because everyone knew it wasn't harmless. It meant you'd seen something management couldn't explain in a budget hearing. Inside, the cultural pressure hardened. A senior analyst scrawled leyline garbage across a draft and recommended kill. The project manager compromised with quarantine. Contamination concern, stamped in red, and a new rule. No citations, no external dissemination, no briefings to civil authorities. It kept the file alive and useless. The memo justifying the stamp might as well be framed. Program provenance taints advisory value. Potential liability if municipal action traces to anomalous sources. Translation, better a drawer than a headline. Not everyone wanted it buried. A junior scientist pitched a tiny pilot under fluorescent lights. Pick one candidate node, publish EM baselines, monitor against a control, and test for differential pre-seismic behavior. The proposal avoided the word grid. It asked for data. The room went still. A supervisor finally said, "We do not own earthquakes, and we do not own EM space. We will not be the agency that says rocks sing." The meeting ended with a line that killed curiosity. Declined, risk exceeds mission value. There's a small micro story that explains the red X. The tech remembered a day when a supervisor walked in, flipped through the acetates, and sighed. "If this crosses my desk, it becomes my problem." He boxed the set with a thick marker, "Yes CRFT, Esoterica, Craft." "I'm saving your job," he said, and ordered the drawer to a contractor vault. A week later, the index card for H/Junctions V4 read, "Withheld in full." The work didn't stop existing. It left the building. Handlers kept trying to thread the needle. One memo. "We will be accused of seeing faces in clouds. Our best defense is transparency about misses and methods." Our worst sin would be to bury concordances because they embarrass us. They buried anyway. Budgets tightened, people rotated. MK vanished into a contract line with no receiving office listed. The instrument was bureaucratic, not mystical. The text's last detail isn't dramatic. It's damning. We had consensus marks over the Marmara Bend before 1999. After his MIT, someone added the red X and "do not circulate." Not to claim credit. To avoid it. That's the institutional reflex when truth threatens control. You don't test, you file. We pushed for one more answer. If the overlay was nonsense, why the sticky notes and polygraph banks? The tech exhaled. Because nonsense doesn't ask anything of you. This did. It asked for baselines, for daylight, for admitting we might have to coordinate with cities. That's harder than a burn bag. A handler left one sentence that still sticks to the inside of the file like old tape. Treat as legacy system, not target. It's the closest thing to an admission you'll see in a room allergic to myth. Legacy systems don't care if you're embarrassed. They keep humming until they fail on schedule, or until someone has the nerve to maintain them with the lights on. Seismic and EM anomalies at node sites. While the archive argued with itself, instruments in the field kept catching whispers. Not prophecies, measurements. In peer-reviewed work, satellites logged ionospheric electric field disturbances 10 to 20 days before strong earthquakes. Ground receivers heard VLF propagation bends that didn't match space weather. Researchers fought over mechanisms, gas charging, piezoelectric effects in quartz-rich rocks, lithosphere, atmosphere, ionosphere coupling, but the pattern stuck. Windows of electromagnetic oddness before the ground let go. We took those studies and did the unglamorous overlay. Candidate junctions from the contaminated file laid against hotspot maps from independent papers. In the Pacific, a note a viewer later called "Went Quiet" showed a tapering anomaly record in the 190 SAXS. A long lull, then pulsed returns in the months before swarm sequences. C values crossing statistical thresholds in the 10 to 20 day window. Over Southeast Asia, satellites flagged electric field spikes above a basalt province sitting on a clean conductivity contrast. And along the Marmara steppe over, the same basin the overlay labeled I-1, repeat disturbances stacked in the year before swarm bursts. Ground truth kept us honest. Conductivity mosaics built for utilities and pipeline protection don't care about legends. They map where current wants to flow. Several junction candidates sit right on edges. Abrupt changes between crystalline blocks and saturated sediments. Edges matter. They guide telluric currents, shape stress fields, and if the Singer idea is right, set the conditions for low-frequency coupling. In Istanbul's case, the conductivity edge curves through the northern sea of Marmara, exactly where the leaked Bosphorus hub note landed. Then came the human micronotes. A Peruvian field geologist, working nowhere near a tourist brochure, wrote that their compass hesitated and drifted the afternoon before a moderate shock. Later they learned a regional VLF station recorded a burst the same day. The site lies near a junction the overlay labeled J3. One twitchy compass isn't data. It is a nudge to look harder where instruments already raise their hands. Local logs add texture. Fishermen in Southeast Asia reported shoals moving into shallows, then vanishing, days before an M7. Sensors in the region registered ionospheric anomalies in that same window. Onshore, residents smelled gas and watched streetlights flicker. If underground fluids carry charge and pressure along conductive paths, and if vents connect those paths to the surface, you'd expect smells, lights, fish. You'd expect whistles where the viewers kept saying valves. We built time windows around major events. 10, 20, 30 days before MW7+, we counted EM spikes from satellite and ground stations, scrubbing out solar storms and auroral contamination. Then we asked how often those windows overlapped zones surrounding candidate junctions versus matched controls. Overlaps near candidates were consistently higher. In a few cases, much higher. The Istanbul basin gave the cleanest case. Stacked electric field anomalies over the same sector of water months before swarm sequences. Not every time, but enough to feel like a metronome nobody requested. Meanwhile, the city started listening beneath its own feet. Distributed acoustic sensing along buried fiber registered tiny strain whispers, micromotions that don't make the evening news. Line those whispers up with ionospheric blips overhead, and you get a layered picture. Air reacting, ground tightening, a system breathing before it coughs. No agency published a headline, but emergency sirens ran late-night tests with no press release, and DS lines quietly expanded across districts that straddle the conductivity edge. Skeptics have the right questions. The atmosphere burps. The sun flares. Power grids spit noise into the ground. That's why we threw away any anomaly window coincident with geomagnetic storms, substorms, or known grid interference. What survived were quieter, localized disturbances that repeat near certain places. The nodes weren't magnets for every weird blip. They were recurring actors in specific kinds of pre-seismic behavior. Controls matter. Parkfield's famous null EM results live in our notebook in heavy ink. But Parkfield isn't a conductivity edge like Marmara or the basalt belts. Different rock, different water, different geometry. If coupling depends on edges and cavities, not every fault sings. The null becomes a baseline, not a universal veto. Back to the Pacific. Mid-century underwater tests sent pressure waves that rang basins. Right after the largest shots, anomaly patterns shifted gaps then. Altered timing of returns, then clusters of larger events. A memo in the contaminated file used acoustic language, post-event resonant drift. We can't prove causation. We can show that a basin with a candidate junction behaved differently after a slap, then slowly drifted back toward earlier rhythms. If a singer can be detuned, this is what it looks like. In Istanbul, the mechanical story meets the measurements. Resistivity transects across the shelf show patchwork pathways. Sediments here, crystalline blocks there, sharp boundaries where water and rock trade control. The candidate node sits on that boundary. The leaked cap fracture? Note sketched a misaligned cover over a throat that used to couple tone to flow. Add a century of culverts sealed, drains blocked, and resonant masonry stripped for roads, and you've got a hub whose maintenance stopped while modern hum rose. None of this promises prediction. It argues for posture. Publish continuous EM baselines, so anomaly claims have a denominator. Keep DS listening so strain whispers have a timeline. Correlate openly with space, weather and power grid logs so false positives die fast. Then treat risk windows as coupling windows, times when the system is more responsive to both good nudges and bad luck. If this is coincidence, it's disciplined. If it's signal, it's asking us to stop treating grid like a word that gets you laughed out of a meeting and start treating it like a testable hypothesis with guardrails. Because the blips over Marmara aren't rare anymore. They're clustering around the same arc of water the overlay circled and the viewer called cracked. And the window the missing page flagged isn't abstract. It's on calendars pinned above desks where people stay late when sirens practice after midnight. Archaeological alignments and maintenance clues. Walk the lines the overlay implies, and you keep tripping over stone that behaves like a logbook. Not myths layouts. Take the Great Circle arcs brushing Giza, Angkor, and the Nazca region, then step onto bedrock. Builders chose edges where conductive sediments meet crystalline highs. The same boundaries utilities still flag on grounding charts. At those edges, they carved galleries that narrow like tuned pipes, chambers that lock into low notes, and shafts that couple inside pressure to outside air. When you clap or drum in some of these rooms, the walls answer with a tone you feel, not hear. Angkor looks celestial from the sky, but walk its arteries and you see hydrology engineered like a circulatory system. Laterite and sandstone causeways carry water across seasonal cycles. Sluices open and close in patterns tied to calendars etched on lintels. At Giza, the air shafts aren't fireplaces. They're narrow, smooth throats linking resonant cavities to outside conditions. In the Nazca region, the Puccios spiral into subterranean aqueducts, vented, pressure-balancing lungs for a thirsty plateau. Function first, legend later. Old caretakers never used words like piezoelectric or telluric. They talked about places that breathe. Rites matched seasons and star positions not for drama, but timing. Equinox mornings with drums on thresholds. Conch shells sounding across valleys at dawn. Waterworks opened, flushed, resealed. When the contaminated file muttered phased activation and aligned to equinox reference, it wasn't inventing ritual. It was rereading a maintenance calendar written in sound and stone, where patterns tell the boring truth. Thresholds at vent mouths polished by centuries of hands. Narrow apertures re-chiseled on predictable intervals. Gutters cleared each dry season, sealed against storms, opened again when the air went heavy. In some complexes, resonant blocks, dense, quartz-rich slabs, sit on softer bedding like primitive isolators. Sweep a tone today, and those slabs still pick favorites. That's a tuning curve hiding in plain sight. Across the Pacific, a missionary diary from 1908 records men clearing a basalt vent while elders beat a slow rhythm on stone drums. The ground sighed, the writer noted, and a smell like lightning rose. Then a line in different ink, practice discouraged by authorities. The entry never returns. A century later, near that coast, underwater tests rang the basin. Local fishermen renamed the outcrop the Silent Place. The file's phrase "shutdown" stops sounding theatrical and settles into a ledger of small prohibitions adding up. Tooling anomalies recur in dry site reports. Anatolian ledges drilled with shallow, evenly spaced holes that, when modeled, behave like a Helmholtz array, shaping resonance with stone. Mesoamerican vaults that corbel to focus low frequencies. A single voice becomes many at the right pitch. At Angkor, acoustic sweet spots sit exactly where water control features converge. None of this proves a global grid. It does show a class of builders tuned for behavior, not display. Now watch what interrupts the song. Colonial bands shutter rights. Across hubs just as industrial extraction peaks. Quarries strip ringing blocks for ballast and roads. New roads cut across embankments that once baffled sound. Dams flood low channels, changing water tables and loading at line intersections. In cities like Istanbul, modern upgrades seal side culverts and drain throats under historic neighborhoods. The interface the viewers kept calling a cap stops flexing and starts cracking. Measurements finally catch up with the stories. Teams that haul in microbarographs and EM sensors find some chambers wake only in specific meteorological and lunar conditions. The air barely moves, yet pressure oscillates on a schedule. Voltage flickers across carved surfaces. Older keepers would have called that a sign. Today is the day to open the vents. The protocol's line, "Verify exhalation," sounds less mystical when a thermal camera shows a faint cool plume over a cleared throat after a tone sweep. Istanbul wraps it all into one crowded case. Roman foundations, Byzantine cisterns, Ottoman aqueducts, layered waterworks straddling a conductivity edge between crystalline inland rock and marine sediments under the shelf. These weren't just pipes, they were pressure management for a landscape that swells and drains with season and tide. 19th century ledgers list removal of resonant slabs from a ridge aligning with the leaked Bosphorus hub. A century later, culverts under that ridge are bricked, side channels culvert, and the city grows over a throat the file flags as Phase 1. The calendar on temple walls, equinox, solstice, lunar standstill, maps when tidal forces and ionospheric states shift. Those windows lower the cost of coupling tone to rock and water. The contaminated overlays instruction to align to equinox reference lands on the same days caretakers once chose for drums and drains. Festivals begin to read like scheduled maintenance with a chorus. No honest archaeologist will sign a line that says temples prevented earthquakes. But the material record does show this. People identified places where the ground is unusually responsive. They marked them with durable geometry. They returned on schedules that match physical windows. They maintained vents and tuned cavities. And when those habits broke under bands and concrete, behavior at some edges changed. Add modern hum. Power returns, dams, underwater shocks, and neglected singers drift off key. Call it culture, call it coincidence, call it a legacy interface flooded by noise. The stones don't care which word we pick. They answer when conditions line up. The only choice left to us is whether we treat those answers as superstition or as a maintenance manual we forgot how to read. The 20th century, Shutdown Hypothesis. While the stones went quiet, the modern world started to hum. Electrification rolled copper across continents, and high voltage returns leaked fields into soil. Small biases that utilities track on paper but rarely say out loud. Ground currents don't stay in wires, they find the easiest paths. If the lattice depended on subtle telluric flow choosing precise routes, we tilted the board in the 190s without ever checking the old diagrams. Engineers mapped pieces of it with no myth attached. Utilities built ground conductivity charts to cut losses. Pipeline operators fought stray currents chewing steel. Radio techs logged nighttime skip as the ionosphere flexed. Stack their maps, and you get this. By the mid-20th century, the near surface was flooded with human-made signal. A tuned singer, set to bleed stress at a gentle beat, suddenly had a continent-wide buzz riding on it. Even if the lattice was only a natural framework, our grids pushed it off pitch. Then came the oceans. The Cold War turned basins into drums. Underwater blasts, conventional and nuclear, sent pressure waves that rang shelves like bells. Right after the largest 195's tests, anomaly patterns shifted in sectors that later show up on the contaminated overlay. Gaps where earlier blips used to appear, altered timing, then clusters of larger releases. The memo language is careful, post-event resonant drift. Acoustic phrasing in a file that hates poetry. It's what you see when you slap an organ pipe. It doesn't shatter, it plays wrong for a while. Dams did their own detuning. Reservoir-induced seismicity is in the literature. Added load changes stress, water seeps, faults lubricate, pore pressure rises. Build that dam near a conductivity edge, a place a junction would sit, and you've bolted a heavy hand onto a valve. In several regions with candidate nodes, we found a simple sequence: dam completion, microseismic swarms, later a notable main shock. Maintenance logs that might once have cleared vents on a schedule are gone. Concrete doesn't listen, it imposes. Industrial extraction took the singers' throats. Quarry ledgers in the 19th and 20th centuries list ringing blocks, removed from ridges that align with leaked node marks, dense, resonant stone, carted away for ballast and roads. At Istanbul's edge, archives record fine ringing slabs cut from a ridge that lines up with the penciled Bosphorus hub. A century later, culverts under that ridge are bricked, side channels sealed, and a metro sprawls over a throat a viewer labeled cap cracked. Meanwhile, our signals multiplied. Radio, radar, switching transients, broadband grit layered over the ELF/VLF bands where lithospheric coupling shows up. Grounded towers stamped rhythmic fingerprints into soils. Pipelines added cathodic protection that shoved current into the crust deliberately. None of this is sinister. It's just loud. The protocol's quiet step, establish a baseline before excitation, becomes impossible if the baseline is a chorus of human noise. Policy finished the shutdown. Colonial bans shuttered rights tied to equinoxes, the very windows where tidal and ionospheric conditions make coupling cheap. Local caretakers were pressed into silence. The 20th century asked cities to pave, dam, wire, and hurry. The old calendar disappeared, just as modern hum peaked. If the Lattice ever needed scheduled clearing and gentle tones, that's when it lost both. A case study shows the shape. In the Pacific, a node candidate near mid-century tests shows a pre-test rhythm of frequent moderate releases, then a lull, then larger, less frequent events, timing stretched like a detuned string. Ground receivers and later satellites logged VLF and electric field quirks decaying months after shots. It isn't causation proved. It's a basin that got slapped and took time to forget. Istanbul gives you the urban version. Roman drains, Byzantine cisterns, Ottoman aqueducts, pressure management layered atop a conductivity edge. By the late 1800s, quarrying strips resonant slabs. By the 20th century, side culverts are sealed, new roads sever embankments that once baffled sound, and electrification laces the ridge. Add the North Anatolian Fault's loaded step over, and the viewer's cracked cap stops being mystical. It's a misaligned cover on a clogged throat under a city of 15 million. Gatekeepers didn't plan a shutdown. They managed optics. Program provenance taints advisory value. One memo warns. Liability eclipsed curiosity. If the protocol survived on a missing page, it did so because it asked for public baselines, gentle tones, and shared custody. Exactly what secrecy can't abide. The rest of the shutdown came from progress. Grids, dams, blasts, quarries, bans. 1,000 small decisions that mistuned a responsive framework we never admitted we used. Call it drift, detune, or noise. The effect is the same. A system that once bled stress and scheduled size now coughs on a clock we don't control. If the Lattice is real, the 20th century didn't kill it. We made it play off key, and then blamed the song. Conflicting evidence and skeptical review. Let's slow down and seat the skeptics at the table first. Archaeologists warn that with enough sites on a globe, you can draw lines anywhere. Statisticians pile on. Large point sets on a sphere produce apparent alignments by chance. If you begin with the answer, grid, you'll backfill the dots until it looks true. That's real. So we built guardrails that cut our own romance before anyone else had to. First, we killed pretty maps. Any candidate that didn't anchor to all three pillars, conductivity edge, repeat EM windows scrubbed of solar noise, and blind session coordinates within hard tolerances, went gray. Whole arcs that looked cinematic died on contact with utility mosaics. Famous alignments in Europe, failed edge checks, and EM recurrence, they're gone. If the story survives, it does so smaller and duller than believers want, and that's healthy. Parkfield comes up every time. It's the most instrumented fault segment on Earth, and multiple studies report null electromagnetic precursors there. We don't hide that. Parkfield sits in a different regime, rock, water, geometry, as far from our candidate template as you can get. If coupling depends on conductivity contrasts and resonant cavities, not every fault sings. Parkfield becomes a control, not a universal veto. The lesson isn't no signal anywhere. Its signal somewhere needs conditions. Prediction is where critics sharpen knives, and they should. One mid-latitude node flagged a heightened coupling window in spring. No main shock followed. We logged it as a miss. But instruments caught a run of EM anomalies and microseismic whispers that bled measurable strain without a headline quake. If you only count catastrophes, you'll miss quiet relief. We tightened our language. Windows indicate responsiveness, not rupture. Selection bias is the elephant in any room like this. So we pre-registered our filters, land/sea mask, distance thresholds, exclusion of geomagnetic storms, then froze code before touching catalogs. We ran spatial tests against 1,000 randomized point sets. The candidate set sat closer to MW7 plus cluster centroids than 90% of random runs. A skeptic lab reran our scripts and got a slightly weaker, but still significant result. When they swapped in stricter anomaly detections from newer satellite methods, a subset of nodes, Marmara, a Pacific shelf, a Southeast Asian basalt belt, still overlapped. The rest faded as they should. The ancient energy framing is another valid sore spot. Sacred geometry attracts pareidolia. That's why stones are context, not proof. Function beats myth in our filters. Puccios matter because they ventilate aqueducts. Giza shafts matter because they couple chambers to outside conditions. Anchor's hydrology matters because it modulates pressure seasonally. If a site can't show behavior, alignment doesn't save it. A harder critique hits the heart. Remote viewing lacks scientific validation. Agreed. The Stargate transcripts aren't facts, they're leads. We treat them like anonymous tips, discard most, follow only the ones that land on independent ground. When blind sketches, years apart, land on the same conductivity edge where EM windows repeat, that's a cross-check. When they don't, we cut them. We also disclose misses. That's how you keep the rumor mill out of the lab. False positives haunt EM work. Space weather, anthropogenic noise, even thunderstorms can spoof anomalies. So we binned any window overlapping geomagnetic KP spikes, substorms, or identified grid switching events. We published those bins with the nulls. What survived were localized, repeating disturbances near specific edges. They aren't constant. They cluster. That variability is a feature skeptics and supporters can both use to test mechanisms. Mechanism matters. Gas charges migrating upward, piezoelectric effects in quartz-rich rock, lithosphere, atmosphere, ionosphere coupling. None of these are exotic. The argument is scale and reliability. Ricotake's observation that larger events tend to show longer precursor times doesn't guarantee a clock. It suggests windows where coupling is more likely. We frame it that way because the alternative, precise dates, breaks people and budgets. Here's where the Istanbul thread refuses to sit quietly. Distributed acoustic sensing keeps hearing microstrain along fiber on the shelf. Ionospheric anomalies stack over the same arc of water in multiple independent studies. The conductivity edge threads right through the step over the leaked overlay labeled I1. You can dismiss viewers. You can carve half the archaeology out. The modern instruments are still pointing to the same patch. The last skeptical point is duty. Crying wolf carries a cost: panic, fatigue, bad policy. That's why our recommendations are low regret. Open baselines, guardrail protocols, small amplitude tests at low-risk nodes first, with public dashboards and pre-agreed stop conditions. If the grid hypothesis dies under daylight, cities still gain resilience. If it holds even a little, we've already learned to move gently and to stop when the song goes wrong. The missing page surfaces, Harmonics protocol. The missing page didn't arrive as a scan. It arrived as a voice on a scrambled line, reading a checklist they said they'd memorized when the drawer still had a label. No incense. No prophecy. Steps. Phase 1, establish baseline. 45 days minimum of continuous EM logging around the candidate node, 3 concentric rings. Inner at 5 kilometers, mid at 15, outer at 30. calibrated to a shared background, scrubbed for space, weather, and grid noise. No activation without baseline, the voice repeated. Write that twice. Phase 2 was the part handlers used to mock until the math showed up. Acoustic excitation, low amplitude, band swept. Not random. The table tied target frequencies to local geology, quartz fraction, cavity dimensions, fluid saturation. 7 bands, indexed through G, each with a recommended dwell and ramp slope. Sources were practical, piston drivers, water-coupled thumpers, wind hum exciters seated over vents on compliant pads. You're not shaking houses, the reader said. You're whispering into stone. Then came the line that makes cities twitch. Phased activation across 7 major nodes. The calendar in the margin tied passes to equinoxes, solstices, and lunar standstills, not as ritual, but as windows when tidal forces and ionosphere lower coupling cost. The instruction at the top of the grid overlay, aligned to equinox reference, landed in a column with dates you can compute, not invent. Start at I-1 Bosphorus Hub, the voice read, and let the silence sit. Phase 3 sounded like municipal work orders in disguise. Conductive pathway maintenance. Clear silted drains. Unbricked culverts that were sealed for convenience. Restore shallow groundwater contact at mouths where concrete isolated rock from seasonal flow. The page listed resistivity targets for near-surface layers and flagged red lines where values drifted too high. Poor coupling, poor control. If water can't talk to rock, tone doesn't stick, the reader said. You'll overdrive upstream without meaning to. Phase 4 had the word that made monitors roll their eyes, now dressed in instruments. Relief vent verification. Microbarographs for pressure oscillations. Thermal cameras for cool exhalations. Gas sniffers for charging. Verify exhalation, the line reads, then adds a safety clause. Shut down at first sign of overdrive. The note in the margin makes it plain. Do not chase the song. If a node lags, halt. Return to baseline. Don't skip ahead in the schedule because someone wants progress. I asked about amplitude. Strict caps, the voice said, and red numbers. Particle velocity thresholds. Acceptable ground acceleration at the culvert mouth. Maximum SPL at surface measured 10 meters from source. Everything written to keep human sensation below nuisance and structural coupling below hairline risk. The sequence insisted on local community liaison, a published dashboard, and a pre-signed stop rule any partner could invoke. Open data, the reader said. No alarms, no promises. Then the part nobody expects on a page that grew out of a file with ghosts in the margins. Instrumentation lists we can rent tomorrow. Broadband seismometers, vector magnetometers, ELF/VLF loops with low noise preamps, microbarographs, thermal imagers, resistivity rigs, fiber DS access if available. Placement diagrams showed polar patterns for drivers, baffling to keep air coupling from swamping microphones, and grounding straps to keep grid hash out of the receivers. You're building a lab in a neighborhood, the voice said. Behave like one. We asked how you know the band. You sweep small first, came back. A pre-pass across the 7 bands with long dwells at safe amplitude, looking for synchronized winks. Tiny dips in microseism noise, faint ELF tremors across 2 or more inner ring receivers. A microbarograph sidetracked to the source. The table marked 3 signatures, Type S, strain quieting, Type E, ELF tick, Type P, pressure oscillation. If 2 of 3 show at the same band, that's your local note, the reader said. Then you nudge, not push. Scheduling read like air traffic control. The grid showed 7 nodes lettered and sequenced so neighbors wouldn't steal load. I-1 first in spring equinox window, Node 2 at a Pacific shelf 3 days later, Node 3 in a basalt belt 5 days after that, then a rest period while baseline stabilized. Never run 2 adjacent nodes within 72 hours, the page warned. Failure cascades if sequence broken. The voice dropped a register. We tested that on paper. We did not test it outside. What if a node refuses to respond? The table had a column for that. If no type S/E/P within 2 cycles, halt. Inspect conduits. Reassess resistivity. Do not increase amplitude. The only poetic line on the sheet sat under that block. You don't force a stuck valve. You ease it or you wait. Below it, a hard number, maximum. Sessions per window, with a quota you can't exceed without a new baseline. We asked the question gatekeepers hide behind. Who signs this? Everyone, the voice said. City engineers, university labs, utilities, community reps at the table, sensor feeds mirrored to a public portal. If you hide it, you own it, they added. If you open it, we all do. The last instruction was a clock. Window opens in the next 18 months. The schedule keyed to equinox alignment and predicted stronger coupling. Longer pre-seismic windows, better signal to noise. Istanbul at phase 1 wasn't a dare. It was a burden with a fuse. The page wasn't asking for faith. It was begging for discipline before the ground picks its own sequence and keeps time without us. The gatekeepers, why they buried the map. Follow the signatures through the building, and you find the fear. The fastest way to kill a radioactive idea in government is to make it someone else's problem. The contaminated overlay, nodes, harmonics, that faint Istanbul sequence start, didn't just look awkward. It threatened a line leadership treats as sacred. Intelligence analysis must never, on paper, steer public safety policy. If a mayor acts on a file with remote viewing fingerprints and anything goes wrong, liability isn't theoretical. It's careers snapping in sequence. A memo, lawyered within an inch of its life, says it out loud. No dissemination to civil authorities. Program provenance taints advisory value. Potential exposure to claims if municipal action traces to anomalous sources. In plain speech, if a city says the CIA told them to clear vents and nudge stone, and something breaks, the check's got an agency name on it. Better to stamp esoterica and let the drawer handle the burial. Strategists saw a different hazard. If a lattice exists even as a natural framework, it looks like a sensor array you didn't build but might exploit. Could a rival mask submarine traffic under lithospheric noise, or hide tests inside coupling windows? You don't publish a how-to for nudging geophysical systems. You compartment it, wargame quietly, and keep the map from anyone who might turn scheduling into policy. Reputation sealed the lid. Stargate already dragged the building through headlines it hated. Remote viewing plus earthquake risk is a late-night monologue waiting to happen. Managers who spent years clawing back credibility weren't going to let stone lungs and valves sit next to bridges and hospitals. A supervisor's margin caught the mood. Admitting RV-informed risk maps invites congressional ridicule and budget retribution. Survival reflex. Sever the wire between weird and actionable. Budget politics did the rest. When Stargate collapsed into declassification in the mid-199s, crates scattered to contractors and storage. Anything without a clean sponsor became a line item nobody wanted to defend. A project officer wrote, "Purge materials likely to induce narrative drift." The overlay, by definition, induced drift. It connected blind sketches to real maps in a way that begged for money and sunlight. Easiest path, downgrade, misfile, mislabel. There's a hallway micro-story that explains how culture enforces caution with a marker. A mid-level walked into the overlay room, thumbed the acetates, and said, "If this lands on my desk, it's my problem." He boxed the set under Yes CRFT, Esoterica Craft, then told the tech, almost kindly, "I'm saving your job." Days later, a routing slip sent the drawer to a contractor vault. The work didn't die. It left. Handlers tried to do the honorable thing within bad optics. One wrote, "We will be accused of seeing faces in clouds. Our best defense is transparency about misses and methods. Our worst sin would be to bury concordances because they embarrass us." They buried anyway. Budgets shrank. People rotated. MK dissolved into a vendor code with no receiving office listed. Annex C evaporated from the paper trail and reappeared as a whisper. Then the private sector stepped into the vacuum. A firm filed a patent for a geoharmonic coupler. Language lifted, sanded, and sanitized. Low-frequency excitation. Subsurface coupling. Real-time feedback to avoid overdrive. They didn't say earthquake mitigation. They said resonance management for extraction stability. It slips past regulators because it speaks profit, not public safety. The device aims at the same bands the missing page lists. Someone inside saw the filing. An anxious email chain followed. "Is this ours? No. Does it conflict? Only if we surface." That's the trap the gatekeepers built for themselves. As long as the protocol stays buried to protect reputations, private actors get to experiment in the open, maybe at nodes, maybe out of sequence, without the guardrails the page demanded. If they move fast in the wrong place, we'll learn how failure cascades in real time. Liability wasn't the only ghost in the room. There was power. If a grid is real enough to nudge, who decides? When to sing? National security logic hoards levers. Mayors want roofs tied and culverts cleared. Agencies want options. The Harmonics protocol demanded the opposite of control. Shared baselines, public dashboards, pre-signed stop rules anyone at the table could invoke. That's governance by consent, not compartment. The tech with the banker's box set it flat. They didn't bury it because it was false. They buried it because it was unmanageable. Unmanageable means slow, transparent, accountable. Everything crisis managers avoid when headlines punish honesty and reward certainty. The buried page broke that habit. Listen first. Nudge gently. Publish everything. Stop at the first hint the song's turning into a shove. So the map stayed lost, at least on paper. The nodes didn't. They kept humming under cities and shelves while sirens ran night tests and fiber listened for whispers. The people who could have helped chose not to own it. Which leaves one path that doesn't wait for permission. Make the work boring, public, and small. Then invite the gatekeepers to join after the door's already open. Field test. A quiet node and a small result. We picked a place nobody argues about. A scrub ridge at the edge of a sediment basin, 2 hours from the nearest port. The conductivity map showed a clean boundary. The old overlay had a faint circle here, J7. No tourists. No headlines. A rancher, a leaning microwave tower, and wind that quit by sunset. If the protocol was going to be wrong, it would fail quietly here. Baseline first, like the page insisted. 45 days of listening. 3 rings of sensors at 5, 15, and 30 kilometers. Broadband seismometers, ELF/VLF ferrite loops with low-noise preamps, a vector magnetometer on the ridge, microbarographs in wind shields, and 2 resistivity lines walking across the edge at dawn and dusk. We scrapped every interval with geomagnetic noise or grid switching spikes. The rest looked like a sleeping animal, daily breathing, occasional snores from distant quakes, nothing weird. We opened the dashboard to anyone who cared. 2 university labs mirrored feeds. The county engineer sent a crew to snake a culvert the rancher said floods every spring. We pulled packed silt and a crust of gravel that had sealed the mouth years ago. The rancher watched, thumbs hooked in a belt. That thing used to gurgle, he said. Then it went quiet. Day 1 of activation was deliberately boring. Piston source on compliant pads over bedrock, water-coupled thumper at the cleared culvert, long dwells from 0.3 to 3 Hz, gentle ramps, wide pauses. We logged a sweep. The ground barely noticed. Microbarographs showed the tone as a faint heartbeat. Seismometers picked table taps 3 rooms away. Nothing dramatic. We shut down compared to baseline and slept. Day 2 crossed 1.1 Hz, and 2 inner-ring ELF receivers winked together, modest, synchronized upticks that faded when the tone moved off-band and returned when we came back. The 15-kilometer ring echoed faintly. 30 kilometers didn't care. Microseism noise dipped a fraction in a narrow band and stayed low for almost an hour after the pass. No spike in ground acceleration at the source. No nuisance levels at the fence line. The rancher shrugged. Spring's trickling steadier, he said later, almost apologizing. Could be nothing. We ran controls. 2 non-node sites, same geology family, no conductivity edge. Same gear, same sequence. No notch. No synchronized ELF glint. If anything, microseism noise bumped up for a few minutes, like the ground rolled over. Back at J7, the notch returned when the culvert mouth was open and shrank when we set a temporary flap to block flow. Conductive pathway, the acoustician said, tapping the protocol printout. Tone sticks when water talks to rock. We tightened guardrails. Amplitude stayed capped. Any instrument that twitched into red would kill a run. A neighbor could wave us off. Every trace, instrument spec, and weather log posted live. A lab across the state said wind sometimes fakes a microseism dip. We overlaid anemometers. No match. Another flagged distant surf. Buoy data was flat. We logged the objections with the plots, because that's how you keep faith with your own skepticism. On day 4, a thermal imager picked a faint cool exhalation over the culvert mouth for 20 minutes after the sweep. Microbarographs showed a shallow oscillation you'd never feel. Gas sniffers stayed flat, no hazard. The rancher lifted a shoulder. That's the gurgle, he said, almost to himself. He didn't call it a valve. He called it the thing his grandfather used to clear with a shovel after the first fall storm. Day 5, nothing. No notch. No ELF wink. Wind was lazy. Surf normal. Instruments healthy. We marked a null and took long coffee. The acoustician said the ground's mood shifts, and you don't force a stubborn note. The line from the page, "Don't chase the song," stayed taped to the dashboard. By day 10, the pattern held enough to get boring. At J7, in that narrow band around 1.1 Hz with the culvert open, microseism noise dipped modestly and ELF ticked in sync, then relaxed. Controls stayed empty. Resistivity across the edge nudged down a hair after each pass, like water and current found each other just a little easier for an hour. We never raised amplitude. We never stacked passes tight. We never touched a second band. We logged and walked away. We sent the data to labs that disliked this story. One wrote back that the notch looked real but small. Another said the synchronized ELF winks were the only interesting bit. A third told us to run it in winter, when air is dense and coupling shifts. We scheduled it. If the effect vanishes, we'll publish that louder. If it grows, we'll say that without adjectives. There was one moment that belonged to people, not plots. The rancher stood by the culvert at dusk, listening to a tone he couldn't hear. The spring below ran steady. He nodded once. "Feels right," he said, and walked back up the road. He never saw the dashboard graphs. He knew the sound of a throat that could breathe again. We packed the last case as a notification hit phones 3 time zones away. Istanbul's midnight sirens had run another test. The DS lines on the shelf had grown by 20%. The equinox window circled on our calendar didn't look theoretical anymore. It looked like a date you either meet with discipline or meet on the other side of a headline. The remote viewer's final session. The transcript doesn't warm you up. It drops you into a body already braced. Stone lungs, sleeping engine, too much pressure. The pen scratches faster than the monitor speaks. Describe the structure. The answer is blunt. Shell. Cap crack here. A jag across a circle. A throat drawn off to the side, tapering. The label lands without flourish. Singer. The monitor keeps them on rails. Texture? Hard, cool, damp. Smell? Metal. Ozone. Temperature? Cold in the chest. They weren't told Istanbul. The cue was function only, blind and careful. But the behavior wouldn't stay quiet. It used to move sound through, the viewer says. Now it's stuck. Pressure building. The monitor redirects. Mechanical? The viewer resists the word, groping for something that doesn't get them mocked. It's like alive but not. It responds when touched right. Margins later gave it language that wouldn't start a fight, responsive interface. Physiology creeps into the room. The memo notes a sheen of sweat, light nausea, a pulse up 10 beats. The monitor grounds them. Pull up. Take an aerial. Look for patterns. The pen traces intersecting arcs like paths across a sphere, then taps at nodes. Sequence, the viewer murmurs. You don't open the wrong one first. The handler's pencil adds a line that will echo into the protocol. Amplification risk if sequence broken. The metaphors don't get fanciful. They get specific. It makes a low like a whale in rock. The monitor asks for frequency. The viewer shrugs inside the chair. Slow, deep, between heartbeats. They mark a band by feel, not numbers. Later, labs will call it around 1 Hz at a culvert mouth. In this room, it's just a human trying to read a system that talks in tones. The sketch tightens. A cap crosshatched like stone. A fracture angling toward a throat. A side channel narrowing to a mouth. Throat clogged, the viewer says, grimacing. Silt. Wrong shape. They circle the cap and write, cracked. The monitor presses for function. Pressure release. The response comes steady now. Guides, not people energy. The handler writes a single word in the margin, telluric. Dates were off limits, and still a window slips out. Late next year, the viewer says quietly, then corrects themselves. Equinox season. The handler underlines the phrase, then scrawls tasker contamination, as if to swat it away. Years later, a schedule keyed to equinox shows up on a missing page. In this room, it's just a bracket around time and restraint. Origin questions are a trap the monitor knows to spring, and then close. Who built it? The viewer flinches. People built with it, not all of it. Old. Found. The handler's pencil returns to the same uneasy compromise the file keeps making. Anthropogenic overlay on natural framework. The viewer isn't trying to write history. They're trying to keep the song from breaking. A tiny detail sits like grit in the paper. On the cap sketch, the viewer starts a letter, B, then scrubs it out hard enough to ghost the carbon. The transcript never says Bosphorus. It doesn't need to. The behavior lines up, cap, crack, clogged throat, pressure waiting under an arc of water where conductivity changes and sirens practice at night. The monitor brings them back to body. Sensory one more time. Taste? Metal. Smell? Ozone. Sound? Low, steady, like a held breath. The nausea eases as they pull to a neutral vantage. The pen slows. The last movement on. The page is a simple instruction disguised as a hope. Touch it gentle, the viewer says. If you push, it coughs hard. The monitor nails it to the form. End session. Then, in an uncommon human aside, writes, treat as legacy system, not target. Afterward, the handler files a short memo that reads like a line held between teeth. Do not red ask for dates. Queue function only. Recommend independent physical monitoring. That one decision, don't ask people to be clocks, ask them to be sensors, threads into everything that follows, baselines, tones, culverts, dashboards, stop rules. When we read this now, it isn't romance. It's maintenance. A cap with a crack. A throat that used to sing. A sequence that matters more than pride. It hears us. It's waiting. The viewer wrote in the margin no one planned to quote. If responsive, missteps risk amplification, the monitor warned. The rest of the file tried to bury the feeling under stamps and labels. We're past feelings. The window they didn't want dated is circled on calendars in rooms with dashboards and fiber feeds. The only question left is whether anyone in charge can sit still long enough to listen before they touch the first note. What it means and what comes next. Strip the mystique and treat this like engineering. If there's a legacy interface in the crust, part natural, maybe lightly human-tuned, it isn't malevolent. It's neglected. The protocol reads like deferred maintenance. Listen first, nudge gently in known bands, clear the pathways, verify the exhale, and never break sequence. That's not a prophecy. That's a checklist. So here's the practical path. Publish continuous EM baselines around candidate hubs, especially the Bosphorus, mirrored at universities with open dashboards. Fold in solar indices and grid logs so false alarms die fast. Keep distributed acoustic sensing listening under fiber, where it exists, and add microbarographs at edges where air couples to stone. Put vector magnetometers and VLF loops where they can avoid power noise. Boring is good. Boring builds trust. Next, test where risk is low. Replicate the J7 result at other quiet edges. Low amplitude infrasound sweeps, water coupled where possible, caps locked, guards in place, stop rules visible to everyone in the room. If the notch repeats, publish methods and failures side by side. If it vanishes, say so louder. Either way, cities gain tools, not rumors. Urban work orders matter more than lore. Unbrick culverts that were sealed for convenience. Reconnect shallow groundwater where concrete isolated bedrock. Protect resonant masonry from demolition. Avoid paving over historical drains that still move pressure. These fixes help floods and fires, even if the grid idea evaporates. Low regret moves with high upside. For Istanbul, caution beats spectacle. If the equinox window is used, cap amplitudes below nuisance, keep sources on compliant pads, and mirror every feed to the public. Pre-sign a halt. A single anomaly across strain, EM, or baro triggers a stop, no debate. Invite skeptics to sit on the console. The fastest way to keep this from turning into a myth is to make it small, accountable, and transparent. Mechanism should stay humble. Gas migration, piezoelectricity in quartz-rich rock, lithosphere, atmosphere, ionosphere coupling, none need magic. Ricketake scaling suggests longer precursors before larger events. Treat that as a window, not a clock. The page's one hard rule holds: don't chase the song. If phase 3 lags, return to baseline. You don't force a stuck valve. You ease it, or you wait. One more layer, shared custody. Utilities no edges. City engineers no drains. Labs no noise. Residents no weird. Put them at one table. Publish raw data, not just conclusions. Quiet competence beats bravado when 15 million people live above a cracked cap. If the lattice is fiction, this process hardens resilience. If it's real, steady hands on small levers beat panic on a deadline. Either way, the responsibility is the same. Listen, move gently, and stop when the system says stop. On the way out of the field, the rancher texted a photo. Water beating along the culvert lip at dawn. A thin thread running where dust had sat for years. It's breathing again, he wrote. A day later, a friend in Katakoy sent a voice note of a midnight siren test and typed, "They keep practicing." Two small human tells on opposite edges of the same story. The buried page reads less like a secret and more like a maintenance manual we ignored while concrete, power, and pride mistuned a responsive system beneath our feet. If you want follow-through, watch what we do next. We'll instrument 2 more candidate nodes, publish every baseline and null, and invite critics to sit on the console as we run small capped sweeps. Subscribe to catch the raw feeds and FOIA drops in real time. Then share this with someone in Istanbul, or any city on an edge, and add your local EM notes to our open log. Then we stop talking and start measuring.